Well, welcome everybody. Today is one of our last session of the year 2022. Today is going to be a pretty loose recap of what happened at the SDN Network Global Conference in Copenhagen about a month ago. We are going to be discussing topics that were introduced in the conference, and we'll kind of discuss the future of service design in the world, what was said at the conference, what wasn't said, and we'll just be able to kind of like bring that content to you all if you haven't had a chance to either be there physically in person, finally after 3 years, as well as not being able to catch some of the content virtually. So this is your chance to catch up on what was said at the conference, which was very interesting. And we're going to do some really quick hustling before we get going. So once again, thank you to our partners who've been with us for several years now, Slalom, as well as Precocity, who are allowing us to get those virtual sessions brought to you for the past 3-4 years now. Once again, this is Service Design Network Danish Chapter. So I am Greg Lacluffy, and with that, today we have Brandon, Robin, and Brenda from Precocity, Capital One, and GM Financial, respectively. As always, those sessions are being recorded. If you've missed the past 20 or so sessions we've had the past several years, feel free to go to our YouTube channel and check out all the service design luminaries who've been thankfully giving us their time for the past 3 years during this global pandemic. Quick reminder that you can ask any question at any time. We're going to moderate the chat room. Just make it obvious to our moderators that you are asking a question to our guest today. And we will gather the questions for you, and we will ask them to our friend Jamin, who's with us today. Today, we're going to be talking about the Service Design Network Global Conference, the first in person in 3 years. This was great to see everybody in person in Copenhagen, Denmark. This was a great conference. There was several hundred people present in the room. We had some wonderful speakers. Someone already came back and actually talked to us and kind of like double-click and go deeper onto some topics that were presented. So we had Anne Deere, for example, a couple of weeks ago, talking about the end cycle of services, how to retire and sunset services. We also had Joke van der Beer, who talked about journey management tools, for example. And I think we have a couple more coming with us. I think Jen Brizelli is going to be next week talking about the learning experience. Today we have with us the wonderful Jamin Hegeman, who is the VP Experience Strategy Capital One, and is or was, I'm not really quite sure what to say here, the VP of Strategy and Global Events for Service Design Network. Jamin isn't great about boasting about himself, so I'm going to do that for him. Jamin has participated in 15 service design conferences. He has co-organized 13 of them, and he has led 11 design. He was also a conference speaker. I'm not quite sure how many times he spoke, but I was able to get a hold of Birgit Megger last night. She's actually in Japan right now, and ask her to share with us what she thought about Jamin. In 2009, during SDN 2009 Madeira, the second one, I asked Jamin if he would want to take more organized conferences. From then on, Jamin continuously took more responsibilities. In 2011, Jamin became part of the leadership team, and with 2011, Jamin was for the first time leading the conference and has done so ever since with an amazing amount of commitment and passion. The Service Design Global Conference will not be what they are today by Jamin. Totally agree with that. I've also talked to Brian, who's the vice president of the leadership team, who reminded me that Jamin had a lovely speech at the Madrid conference in 2017. If you want to see it, it's on YouTube. Maybe Robin or Brian can find that link. But if you want to see Jamin in person speaking in Madrid, you can find that on YouTube, and it was wonderful. That said, Jamin, would you like to introduce yourself, and kind of like let people know, maybe not know exactly who you are, what you do, tell us a bit about yourself, and then we can very quickly hinge into what have you taken of your many years of service for the Service Design Network, the global conferences, what you've got out of those 11 years, and then we just go into the Copenhagen directly after that.
Okay, I mean, I could probably talk for an hour on that, so you'll have to stop me, or I'll try to limit my response there. But hello, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you, SDN Dallas, for inviting me. I'm Jamin Hegeman. I'm based in New York. I used to live in Dallas, actually, for 3 years, down in Knox Henderson. I also, before that, was in San Francisco, where I worked for Adaptive Path, which was acquired by Capital One, and I've been part of Capital One since, for the last 8 years, doing different types of things, but always bringing my service design skill set and expertise to the different roles that I've been in. Currently, actually, I have two feet in two different parts of the organization. I'm leading experience strategy and operations, but I'm on my way into a new role in Capital One, leading enterprise data and machine learning for our organization, and bringing a service design perspective to how we interact with our data across the organization, which is going to be really interesting. I'm married. If you can't see me, I'm a white male, and I noticed we've had a lot of white males in that slide before, and that's something that definitely came up during the conference. And I have a dog, a golden doodle. I live right across the street almost from Central Park, so we go there often with my dog. And I play soccer, I brew beer. I don't know. That's me. And I've been part of this SDN. Thank you for getting those quotes from Birgit and Brian. It goes back a little bit further as well. I went to Carnegie Mellon as a grad student, and I got super lucky. I started my graduate studies in 2006, and I went back to school after being a journalist, an editor, and a web developer. So I had a bit of a career. Went back to school for design, and in my first week as a grad student, we were told, like, oh, we're running this student-led conference, or the previous year was running this conference, and the focus is on service design. I had no idea what that was, but the first week of my graduate program, I went to a conference that included Birgit Mager and others, and I got this like crash course in service design. And then the next year we ran another conference, and I got to lead that. So I started leading service design conferences in 2007. In 2008 was the first SDN service design conference in Amsterdam. I was the MC of that. And then, as Birgit said, in 2009, I also helped with the program, and I emceed that one. And from there on, she kind of asked, like, hey, do you want to be more involved? And I said yes. And that's sort of the story up until now. Let me stop there and see how much I covered and what you want me to go more in depth on.
No, well, I guess before we start talking about Copenhagen, the core topics that we discussed this year, what is your overall takeaway from the past, 15 years of Service Design Network Global Conference? How much of a need is this? Would you tell people to just join? Just tell us the evolution of the conferences over the past 10, 15 years, which was purely, unknown, I guess, 15 years ago, and how much we've come so far.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a journey, as most things are. In 2008 in Amsterdam, we had probably just under 200 people. The network was very small. I think everyone who spoke was part of the network. It was a single track and one day. And then there was a second day that had some workshops where I actually got paired with Alex Nisbet and Shelley Evanson to run a workshop. I'd never met Alex before, but he became my counterpart in 2011, and he and I have been leading the conferences since then. Yeah, I mean, I think what's been interesting about running the conference is it's a service. And a lot of my work has been around digital experiences to a large degree, working for large organizations. So being able to put together a service and run that once a year and see it happening in real time in that very brief period of time has been a very interesting and valuable experience. And dealing with all the constraints of time and a volunteer team, and not being able to knowing how good the experience could be if you had endless time and money, but of course not having all that and having to make decisions and trade-offs along the way has been really interesting. Trying different formats, from straightforward conference talk, which is the typical mental model, or even learning that that's a mental model for people. Like a conference, people have an idea what a conference is. You can be innovative in it, but when you start messing around with it too much, it starts to break the mental model of where am I? What am I at? This is not what I came to do. So we've had unconference aspects of it. We've had different, multi-track, single-track variations of things. And it's been a lot of fun to do that. I can't remember what year it was, but decided that we wanted to make it more of a partnership with local SDN chapters. So we created the proposal process and made it a requirement that it has to be brought by a local chapter, and in an effort to move the conference around to get different feeling of what service design is in different parts of the world, and then bring the perspective and new ideas and energy to it. So it's been fun to try that and get to experience different parts of the world and different people and how they think about service design, and that always influences the feeling of every conference as well.
So did you see an evolution as the practice evolved over time? Did you see the conference evolve, going from more being very academic, educational, how to blueprint, for example, 10 years ago, right? This past month in Copenhagen, there is not a ton of service design 101, so to speak, right? So did you see an evolution of the conference kind of mimicking the market maturity, or is kind of by design we just stop offering more readily available, tips and methodology that could be, acquired now elsewhere at the conference?
I mean, it's definitely evolved. I mean, and the first conference was, a lot of the usual suspects of tools and how we use them. And we do try to keep an element of that, at least in the background of sharing tools and what people are doing. And, but it's less of what you're going to experience in the conference. I'd say these days, I mean, even I think the second conference was the theme was beyond basics. So already we were pretty aspirational with okay, we get it, journey maps and blueprints, et cetera. But, what else are we aiming to do? And, and so I think service design at scale was something we talked about in 2017. And that was something I talked about for sure in that presentation that you referenced, and sort of evolved with how the maturity of service design, where back in the beginning, it was a strong push. And now there's a greater pull for it. It's more embedded into organizations. You're dealing with scale aspects, with leadership aspects, with just integration into the business that are different than just doing the tool, and so I think being able to understand how to create a blueprint and is one thing. Being able to operationalize that in an organization, maintain it, have it continue to be relevant is another challenge. And then the challenges that we face as people, as organizations, as our planet, are changing as well. So that, and I think in this last conference in particular, those things, sustainability, the environment, democracy, politics, the future. Like a lot of that, showed up in the sub themes, I'd say, of the conference.
Okay. Well, if you don't mind, just jump in then. Let's just start talking about what was discussed at Copenhagen. So the conference theme, the overall theme was about courage and designing for good. So what did you take away from the conference? What was your overall feeling about the topic that was discussed? A lot of the speakers kind of obviously referred to designing for good and what it meant to them in terms of optics. So what did you hear? What did you feel was said? Was there anything that you wanted us to know from the conference?
Yeah. I mean, I won't be able to do the conference justice. I just want to say that. So I'm gonna focus on things that kind of resonated for me, month from that time and then the month after. But just to go back to the theme. So we partnered with the Danish local SDN chapter and the Danish Design Center. And, part of that partnership is working with that conference team to develop the theme and, bring the ideas of the local geography and environment to it. So they were very much interested in the environment, in social services and systems, in the role of technology and digital. And as a theme, we got around to the courage to move forward in the face of some pretty large challenges that we have as people, as a planet. How do we deal with sustainability in the environment? How do we deal with technology that maybe isn't always acting in our favor or hurting us? How do we deal with social problems that we have? And so they really anchored on courage, and then courage to do good design. And so that was the overall flavoring of a lot of the talks and the ways that we analyzed who would come. And we, just so you guys know, the way that another aspect that and way that we organize the conference is it's mostly submission led. We do a combination of invited speakers and submitted speakers. Most of the invited speakers are the keynotes. Not always. Sometimes they do come from the submissions, which is awesome. But I think this round we had 150 submissions that we had to narrow down to 20 or so. And there's a lot of great stuff that we just couldn't get to. So it's sort of yeah. But anyway, it's interesting to get all the different ideas from around the globe. We try to be diverse as well in terms of the different geographies and representation, and that's been a focus of particularly the past 2 years as well, of being more diverse in our viewpoints. So so it's about courage, and one of the big themes and the one that started off was around sustainability, which I've mentioned already a couple of times. And just personally, my part of my impression in how some of the talks were framed made it seem insurmountable, just kind of scary. The state of the world and some of the data around where we're heading in terms of being sustainable, or how we can get ourselves in a place where we can balance, what we're doing as humans and what the planet can handle. So yeah, it was a bit overwhelming, but I think that was good in a way, and fitting with the courage, because I think you could easily say, oh, it's too much, we can't do anything. And that was sort of the opposite of what we were trying to come together to say, is that, like, yeah, I mean, these are big problems and it does not look great, depending on, how you look at it. But we do have to have courage and faith and the ability to make positive changes, and we need to act. So I thought there were some great messages there. One of the models that stuck out to me in that regard was the donut model, which you can Google if you want, but it was a donut, as you can imagine, where you're balancing like the planet versus the people, and trying to find the donut kind of represents the middle ground, where the hole and the outside are kind of the pulling forces between the people and the planet and the environment. But I think like there are things like that were helpful in terms of how to frame or think about it. But it was, it was a bit overwhelming. I think as another practical thing coming out of that I took away in terms of like, what can I bring from this into my design work, is there, and I think this extends beyond sustainability and to some of the other topics that were discussed, but like, how do you bring these other stakeholders into your design process? So, we talk about sustainability or like designing for the planet. Like, when you're doing your design work, can you just name the planet as a stakeholder? There was another talk that was focusing specifically on designing for women, and the suggestion there was like, can you just name women as a stakeholder? Which also made me think about a lot of the design work that's going, or the emphasis that we're placing now on who is not at the table when we're doing our design work, or who are we not designing for, and do we know we're not designing for those people? Can we name that? Or can we bring in like, okay, who are these other stakeholders in our design process? Is it the planet? Is it women? Is it people of color? Is it less privileged folks? And keep that present in how we work, so that we don't make decisions that just leave them out of the equation.
So, Jamin, the design for good is very aspirational. As you say, it was like very overwhelming, kind of like dark topics that were brought forth, which was necessary. Do you still think designers can design for good? Do you still think that we have the authority, power to actually make an impact into the world we work in? There are a lot of designers who are frustrated, right? If you work for I don't know, a company that shouldn't necessarily, I don't want to say any names here, but like some designers are very frustrated, right? They don't really feel like they're doing anything good. They don't really feel like they're having an impact, and they really, they get frustrated. It's like, I know I can have an impact. I know I can design for good, but the business or whatever the excuse is just making them kind of like, I didn't get into service design to just kind of like make screens and make things pretty, right? I actually want to have an impact. I want to be like, meaningful to the world. Do you still think we're there? The conference was trying to get us to think that way, but some people maybe felt like, wow, it's a huge mountain to climb.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of aspects to that question that are interesting. So, can designers help in designing for good or creating positive change? Yes, I do absolutely believe that. And I think there was, this, even in the face of like, okay, here's some big challenge we have, I think everybody was saying like, but yes, we can make positive change. And that's the belief of everyone there. I don't think they would be there if they didn't believe that. There was also a talk about the egocentricity that design has, and so I think like some of when I hear like, oh well, designers kind of want to save the world type of thing, I think we should be careful about how we frame that or think about it, because a lot of people want to save the world, and design certainly has a role to play, and probably in a lot of cases can play a greater role, but we're not the only ones that can. So I think we should remember that, and also remember like what our powers are, and power, I think, was another theme that was woven throughout a lot of the talks. It's something that I've definitely been thinking about, and you hear about in the broader design community. But if you bring it down to yourself as a designer, like what power do you have? You have skills that others don't, in terms of perhaps empathy or connection to customers or people that you're designing for, visualization, prototyping, making, envisioning a future, inspiring people. A lot of that is influence. I don't see a lot of places where designers are in the absolute power seat to make overarching decisions. And I don't know that like we'll ever be there. I think there are places that exists, and that influences the decisions of certain companies. But as a whole, I think the role that we play is in influencing and inspiring and illuminating people to who do have power to make decisions that can have large impact. So I mean, and I think there's a lot of hope there. I mean, in my own work, in my personal work and things that I'm doing, I see that continuously throughout my journey as a designer, is to influence those around me, to help them better understand the impact that they're having on people, on the experience, on systems, and provide tools and ways to look at that, so that others can make better decisions. Because I think in a lot of cases, it's not like people want to make bad decisions or want to hurt the environment or hurt other people or leave people out. Often it's just like, okay, well, what they're working with now, the systems or the conditions or the rituals, another topic that was talked about in the conference, that people participate in, were designed not inclusively, and leave people and things out that we can help illuminate, so that they're not left out, so they can make better decisions. And that's because we're all living on this planet that doesn't, we all need it to survive.
So, Jamin, if you look, before we go more into sustainability, we have a couple of questions for you. Robin, can you have the first question for Jamin, please?
Sure thing. And by all means, if I get your name pronunciation incorrect, feel free to correct me, but I believe it's Vedihi. Asked, we often hear money is the bottom line for organizations. How do you see design for good being practically implemented within for-profit organizations? Yeah,
I mean, money is important, but I don't think money is all ruling. Yes, organizations need it to be sustainable. Whenever I'm doing design work and talking to our teams about how we balance designing for people's needs and the needs of the business, if we don't meet the needs of the business, we can't do anything for people, because the business won't exist, or the organization won't exist, or the governmental service won't exist. Like we need to understand like what those other things are, and money is part of that. I mean, organizations are run by people, and I mean, I do believe that people are generally good and care about others, and it's easy to say like, oh, well, this organization's like completely evil. But there are a lot of examples, I think, of organizations that do, make decisions that aren't going to make them the most money, or sometimes give up money, and because they feel like it's the right thing to do. But they can't do that if their business is sustainable. So the more sustainable the business is, the greater ability that they might have to like make choices that don't have to be, just purely about profit.
Thank you, Jamin. Brendan, do you have another question?
Yeah, so this goes back to something you just said a little earlier ago. So we've already seen technology that has been designed and built by our colleagues that, as you said, isn't necessarily acting in our best interests. So did anyone at the conference discuss our roles specifically in changing that? It's a little bit the theme that we've been chatting about. And what are your thoughts on how we as an industry begin to affect that kind of change?
Yeah, I think the one of the things that one of the new activities that the team introduced was kind of like a courage map and a word map of like what does that actually mean. And one of the big things coming out of that was just challenging the status quo, and having the courage basically to say like, I don't think this is right. I don't know, like in the cases of where you might say, hey, here's an example of something that we don't think is good for people, like whether people did, say, hey, this isn't good and, we need to do something about it or not. But yeah, I mean, I don't think we can be complacent and just let things happen because someone else is making the decisions. I think it gets that gets into a hard point of like how exactly do you challenge or how do you influence people to make different decisions. And I think like that was probably one of the things that people may have had some criticism about in a conference setting, which happens a lot. Like, hey, you've inspired me. Like, I want to do this thing. Like, how exactly do I do it? And a lot of how you might do those things can be very contextual. So that's what makes it a bit challenging. But yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Jamin. If it's okay, let's just jump to the next topic, which you've already talked quite a bit. Sustainability and intersectionality, which is two very big topics that we discussed at the conference. We'd like to know more about your take on that. I personally, as you mentioned earlier, the whole use Earth as a stakeholder was so simple, right? And I'm using it in my work as we speak, right? And business actually is playing very well. It's kind of like, that's not a bad idea. Let's just see how much the carbon footprint is. So just something as simple as like using Earth or whatever you want to discuss that as a stakeholder in your personas, whatever you're doing, is actually a very small idea. And it's very simple, it's easy. It's kind of like make business think about like, okay, if we do this, what is the impact on this particular stakeholder? So that was a great idea, I thought. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a simple one from like an early on in the design process, and to have conversations with partners as well. I mean, I think the other thing is, and that was brought up, was how do you measure that? How do you measure what you might be doing as an organization and the impact of that from a sustainability perspective? I mean, I think Layla was saying that like any business could do that, even those that it's where your service seems more or has less of a physical component, because I think a lot of organizations, it's like, oh, it's easy for an airline to think about like how they're impacting the planet, but what about a bank? Like, how do you think about sustainability in that? And she had some ideas there that were like, well, you can look at like how much server usage and that kind of thing. And there are different ways that you could do it. I've been thinking about that. I don't know how exactly to implement some of those things, but I think anytime you can measure something as an organization, I think that you get a reaction, or you get people sort of like tracking, like, okay, well, how are we doing? How can we, increase or reduce whatever that is? So I thought that was something that stuck out with me. Intersectionality, I think, is like a whole different topic, and I was looking at some of the privilege of designer questions there in the chat as well. Just to share and as something that stuck with me from the conference. So we did have a speaker talking about intersectionality and privilege. Highlighted that a lot of our design heroes that we reference are white males, and from a hero perspective, like holding up one individual as like the person that did everything is probably not accurate, as we know that most things are done by groups of people, not individuals. But also just I think for what was interesting is that let me just make it very personal. There was a talk that just showed probably a pretty common intersectionality map or model, and asked you, like, okay, if you look at this, you can kind of see how many of these things might apply to you, and grant you privilege. And often, if you are let's say a white male like myself, I can look at that and go like, check, 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 check. I have a lot of privilege. Maybe I didn't know about that. Maybe I've never thought about it because I'm privileged enough to have never even had to think about it. I'm fortunate enough over the last several years to have done some of my own homework and had trainings and been exposed to some of this stuff to have some greater awareness of it. But not everyone in that conference was. And I was talking to somebody after that talk who was deeply affected and felt that affected, like in both a negative, it was enlightening for them. They never really thought about how much privilege they had. They never thought about that they might need to think about this differently. The conversation I had was like, hey, I have two daughters. I consider myself to be the good guy. I care. I feel like I'm more mindful, but like looking at that intersectionality wheel and seeing how much privilege I have, like, really made me question my role in this whole system, and not having the awareness, I think, is definitely a problem for a lot of folks. And so, like, step one, gaining that awareness, I thought that was super, super important to share and have somebody at the conference speaking to that, speaking about the privilege, and impacting people like that is important. So hopefully, that will lead to people, starting that journey of, okay, well, what does this mean? What can I do with this privilege to help, others or make impact in systems in different ways, or make room for others where, like, maybe I'm taking up too much space. And we need to really look around and see who's not here. Again, going back to like power and the stakeholders, like, well, if you're not aware of the privilege you have, you can't see maybe who's not in the room or who should be in the room.
So on that topic, let me just go ahead and move straight forward to the next question, which was a perfect segue, is designing for women. There was a big topic in the conference where several speakers who speak very actively about how there is a lack of specific design for women. What did you take out of the speakers? There was some really good tangible examples that was given of how women are not being thought for. There was some very specific example about, women goods that actually aren't even designed for women, right? So what did you get out of the conference and those speak? And I guess to kind of like look back into privileges and men designing for women and the whole thing. So how did you get at that?
Well, so there was one talk in particular from a woman from India. And again, I think, part of the value of going to a global conference like this is to get different perspectives from around the globe. And she brought up many examples of things that were designed for women, but not very well. Or, it kind of like looked like, hey, we designed this for a man, let's make it pink kind of thing. And now it's for women. Were some of the more obvious examples, but she used others as well. But for me, it sort of just, it fell into the broader theme or category of who's making the decisions and who are we leaving out of the equation. And, if in any of the examples that were like designing for women, if women were making those design decisions, if women were involved, like you can't imagine that the product would have turned out the way that it did. And that just, I think you can just expand that to like, okay, well, who's making the decisions, who is not involved, how do we get them involved, how do we increase our awareness? So again, going back to like, who do we need to make a stakeholder in this, and at least ask the question of like, well, do we need to co-create with them? Do we need to do research with these folks? Do we need some of those folks on this team to get at the right or get at solutions that are going to be, in the right direction? So that was sort of my takeaway from that talk, was sort of like the broader theme of just inclusivity. And it was interesting because I think it was interesting for me personally to see something about designing for women, because it's almost like that I haven't seen that as strongly recently. The focus on broader diversity and inclusivity. It was just like, okay, well, this is a specific one that I haven't seen in a while. So that was kind of refreshing to be like, oh yeah, like who are all the different examples of folks that we could be leaving out or making decisions for that we shouldn't be. So that was really impactful reminder for me.
Yeah, and I think this was showing very, tangible way that we designers have an impact. We can definitely have an impact into like, no, this is a bad idea, or yes, it's a good idea, or what about so bad? We have that power. We have that voice. We've been claiming to actually not having a voice for God knows how long. And now we actually have the power to kind of like introduce ideas during personal work, right? The very beginning of a project is like, hey, why are we building this? And how are we building another version for women, or accessibility is a big issue as well. So there's definitely like, we have an impact, and, some people just don't really realize that. We can definitely speak up.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, like in the examples given, there was no way to know who was really involved. Again, it's hard to, if you had a designer there, if we were doing, the work that we know we need to do to understand who the actual customers are, or include them in the process, or co-create, it's hard to imagine that some of the results would get to be the way they are. And I think you can kind of expand that to like look at many things that have been designed. Like, okay, well, why did this get this way? Who was involved? Who was not involved? How can we do better? Basically in the future. And I think that was kind of the thing. It's like, look, we can do better. We know that. And as designers, we do have a role to play, and we can make an impact. So like, let's have the courage to do that, and not just accept what we're doing, or to say like, hey, we don't, we can't do anything about it. It's like, well, yeah, we can. Maybe and often like the things are small that we can contribute that lead to big outcomes for the broader system that we're living in.
A similar topic, and just because I want to be respectful of the time, it's almost an hour now, but another topic that was very close to this one was designing the future. We had several people who came forth and had some methodology about designing horizon. There's a whole bunch of futurism topics that are obviously linked to the previous topics, such as sustainability and designing for women. So what did you get about all those speakers that talked about that futurism, the future optics? What did you get out of that?
Well, one, designers are great at painting a picture of the future. So, again, in terms of like our influence and superpower and what we can do, helping to show where we could go, I think is something that's a role we can play. There were some specific ideas that resonated with me, and to summarize it quickly would just be like that the things we're designing now are the future. And some of that might be obvious, but like the sentiment that I was getting is like, okay, we often talk about the future like it's the future. But in reality, like the things that we're putting in place now are going to be the things that we talk about in the future that are then we say like, oh, this is the future, but it's like, no, actually we're doing that now. And how do we think about like what we're doing about now to what that's going to be, 20 or 10 or 20 years out. And speaking of that, one of the other things I thought was interesting was to think about like, what is going to be the same 10 or 20 years from now? And how do, if we're painting a picture of the future, how can we keep in mind like what is going to be there and the same? Because like when we do design something and we put it out there, we all know how difficult it is to change. I mean, I'm sure everyone on this call, if you said like, how many MVPs have you put out that you never like revised, you'd all raise your hands. So knowing like what's still going to be there, what you can build off of, or what's going to be in the way, I think is interesting. There was a really great story about, I want to say a church or a cathedral that had like some doors or that were made of this like special wood, and it's in Europe, and the doors needed to be replaced. I'm probably butchering this story, but the theme is going to be right. The analogy will be right. Like the doors need to be replaced, and it's like, okay, well, we need this special wood, and that doesn't really exist anymore. And then like the gardener was like, oh no, we've been waiting for this moment. We planted a tree like 500 years ago. It's out here. Let me chop it down, and I'll create the doors. Which was like a really interesting way of like thinking about how we design for the future. Like, well, what are we going to, what are we doing now? What are we going to need in 10 years that we need to start putting in place so that we can leverage it at that point in time? So the interesting things to me were like less of like the, designing the future kind of innovation type of stuff that you often hear, more of like, how do we create the conditions or think about the way the world is going to be so that we can leverage the things at the right time or plan ahead for that, and things like that may take time. Like, oh, we're going to plant a tree. That's going to sit there forever. That's fine, but we're going to need it in the future. So that's why it's there. I thought it was a great insight and story.
So let me switch gears a little bit here. Talking about designing the future. At times, and I was in the room with you, it felt that obviously we were in Europe, Denmark, and at times it felt a bit like the future was decided by a handful of companies in Northern California, right? There was definitely a few, comments that were made, I won't say it was a fear per se, but definitely there was some questioning about the fact that future is being decided right now by a few tech companies, in Silicon Valley, run and designed by, again, white male. There are plenty of design companies in Europe who are, thriving, right? Spotify is one of them, just to name one. So what do you feel, is this kind of like a victimization? Is this kind of like, oh, poor us, they are deciding the future for us? Or is this kind of like some truth to that? And you don't have to answer if you don't want to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have a great answer for that, or I don't have a definitive answer. I don't have the answer to it. I mean, it's hard to. Again, it's interesting to go different places and see more global perspectives on what is happening in the world. I mean, I'm guessing from what I saw here, most of us live in the U.S. We tend to have a very U.S. centric view of what's going on in the world, and the rest of the world does pay attention to us, but they also operate in very different ways at times, that we totally forget that there are other ways than the ways that we do things here. I think some of the data shared about sustainability and environmental impact, definitely said that the U.S. and China, need to be on board with these things for us to basically head in the right direction. So from that perspective, yeah, there's a huge role that the U.S. plays in general. I don't know. I can't speculate on how much the technology companies play in that, but yeah, I mean, I think they're easy. There's a lot to criticize right now. I'd say about some of the large tech organizations and what they're actually doing.
Okay. If it's okay, we have a few more minutes. I hope you can stick with us for a few minutes, Jamin. We have a few questions for you. As always, thank you for your insight. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us and what you got from the conference. It was a great conference. Looking forward to go to Germany next year, where you will not be part of the organization, but I'm sure you'll be there in person. Robin, do you have a question for Jamin?
Yeah, and this goes back to a topic we were talking about a little bit earlier, but aside from power being interwoven throughout the conference, was there any discussion around privilege? And I think we actually just spent a good bit of time talking about this.
Yeah, and I saw in the chat someone mentioned George I, and has a link there. He spoke at the SDN conference last year, the virtual one. He's amazing. So definitely, if you want to go into depth on these things, and again, I'm can't do justice to some of the talks that were given. I'm just kind of riffing off of the things that stuck with me and kind of the general feelings and themes. But definitely, go check out what George I said. If you are an SDN member, we will be releasing the talks in the coming months in kind of batches up until July. And then after July, I think they're just going to be freely available to anyone on YouTube. So, you'll be able to go check out some of the things directly. But if there are tons of great, I mean, we've had the conference for a long time. So if you go onto YouTube, you can watch some of the past things as well.
That's a great plug for checking your SDN membership and seeing where you're at, and maybe making plans to attend next year.
Jamin, the last topic I had in my notes was much more tactical. It was around journey management, right? So there are some tools are being around Snaply. It's been around for a while, and now there is Dedu, which had a demo on stage. There was a couple of other speakers who talked about different ways of managing a journey, the user journey. What did you get out of those new tools? Are they opening the toolbox from going from the Miro, Sketch, Figma to these new, much more sophisticated tools? What is your take on this kind of evolution of the service design tools?
I think we need them. Someone made a comment during the conference like post-it notes just don't cut it. And as designers, we like to point to our post-it notes and be like, hey, that's, or others will say that's design. They're all post-it notes, which are great. And I wouldn't say that they don't cut it, but in managing an actual journey, which I think is one of the more complex things to do, particularly in a large organization that's very dynamic. I think we are going to need better tools to do that. I don't think there's a like, hey, this is the silver bullet tool to use right now. I'd say they're still in development. But with the way that organizations are going and the way the data is going, in the increase in service design and just sort of the understanding of journeys in general, like they will be a thing. So it's on my radar. I'm looking more closely and trying to evaluate the state of the tools out there. But I don't have like definitely go to this one. We did have They Do, and so they were showcasing some of their latest functionality. You mentioned Smaply, which is also great, and so I think that is on the horizon and will become more of a. I think that it's a great opportunity for somebody out there to create.
So overall, how do you feel about the democratization of the insights, right? So now those tools definitely open up the door to other people like business, program managers, solution owners actually do interact and engage with the tool themselves, which shows to be like definitely silent design of the toolbox. So designers will do something, it will go to business and come back. Now those tools are interactive by design. How do you feel about being able to share in real time the data we collect through research with stakeholders who are usually kind of like dependent on the information we provide at our own will and time?
Yeah, I mean, it's required. I mean, if designers are holding all the insights or information, then that's not ideal for what we were talking about in terms of being inclusive and making sure people have the data and the influence. So the more that we can use tools or methods that others can access and make better decisions from, the more that we can have metrics that are experience based or service based that others are tracking as well and helping to improve. Like that's going to be those are the types of things that are going to really change how organizations work and lead to better outcomes.
Thank you, Jamin. Brendan, Robin, do we have one more question? I don't want to hold Jamin too long. We're over time now.
Yeah, one more question, and then I gotta.
Yeah, for sure.
And for me.
Go. No, we're good to go?
And
okay.
For me.
All right. Well, Jamin, thank you so much for your time. We hope to see you in Germany next year. You won't be organizing, which is a shame, but we understand you've paid your dues, so to speak. So we're really thankful for your work and your service to the community. You've done a lot for all of us, teaching us and educating us. So we're really hoping to stay in touch with you and have you back here in the future for another topic. Any closing thought, Jamin, about your tenure as this leading organizer of the biggest design conference in the world?
No, just thank you once again for having me. I hope this was interesting or valuable for people, and it's been fun. Thank you.
Good. I think the last question I have for you is like, this was a one-track event. Do you like a two-track, multiple-track event, or just a one-track? What was better for you? Pick your own journey, or kind of like go everybody else?
Like everything, it depends. So the value of a single track, which we had in Copenhagen, somewhat due to constraints that were beyond our control, were was that we had a joint experience, and that allowed for sort of a greater connection and intimacy between participants. But yeah, it doesn't, if you wanted to create more diversity and choice and that kind of thing, then yeah, multi-track is better. You can have different speakers. You can maybe get on different topics or more specific, tracks of things. So there's pros and cons to doing the different ways. I think they all work well and are good. It's kind of, it's again, like one of the great things about designing anything is that, different choices create different experiences and outcomes. And it depends on what it is you're intending to create for people, which is why, you should be thinking about those things. But always you have to balance with the constraints that you have. So sometimes that creates choices for us that we have to balance. So, but yeah, either one works. I appreciated the single track because I got to see everything for the, and which has been the case for the past two virtual ones. Prior to that, we always have multi-track, and I never get to see everything. So, and that was a positive end for me. But we'll probably go back to multi-track in the future.
Cool, very cool. Jamin, thank you so much for being here. It was lovely to actually have an organizer being able to speak at the conference. It's rarely the case. So I really appreciate you kind of telling us what you out of the conference. And we hope to see you soon. Have a wonderful holidays, and then we'll hopefully see you next year.
Yeah. Thanks once again. See you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Take care.
Everyone.